Hello friends, welcome to Nun Academy. As I said in the last video that in the next video I will be teaching you on CPC, Civil Code of Civil Procedure. So here I am with my video. So guys, before starting with the core content of this lecture, I would like to tell you some basic points or basic information about law, about PCSJ or judiciary. So before getting deep into CPC, let's talk about something. For example, what's law? So law is nothing. Law is anything which gives us rights, duties, like this simple definitions. Many scholars have come up with different definitions of law. So there's a huge debate around there is no definition of law. So let's go with the category of laws. Laws mainly of two types, as you all know, procedural and substantive. But before that, two types, civil law and criminal law. What's this Code of Civil Procedure? Civil law. So what is civil law? What is criminal law? What's the basic differences that we should know before going to this topic of Code of Civil Procedure? So my friends, for studying CPC we need this CARE Act, Code of Civil Procedure. Yeah, this will be enough. So CPC is enough. And as I said in my last video that you don't need to go to any books or something. So guys, let's start. So okay, law. Before studying CPC, let's discuss this law. Two types, civil, criminal. What civil? Why the difference? Civil and criminal. Does the difference depends on the nature of the act committed? No. An act can be both a civil or criminal, for example in defamation. So which act of defamation will come in criminal cases and which in civil cases? How we get this? So I'll tell you, whatever the wrongdoer receives as a penalty, if the wrongdoer is getting punishment like imprisonment, then it's a criminal. If the wrongdoer is getting a simple fine, penalty, compensation, if the plaintiff is getting compensation, damages, then that's civil. So basic difference between civil and criminal, to keep it very simple, is see what the wrongdoer is getting as a punishment. If it's a kind of imprisonment, it will come under criminal case. If it is kind of compensation, damages, it will come under civil. So I hope it is clear about civil and criminal, to be very simple. So Code of Civil Procedure, civil. Before getting into CPC, let's deal with another thing. This is one thing about law. Second thing, law. One substantive, another adjective or procedural. I hope you guys would know what's substantive, what's adjective or procedural. Substantive law is something, law which gives us rights, liabilities, which gives the extent of the duties, which provides us the extent of the duties. Those laws come under substantive law. And the procedure, the machinery which enforces these rights, which a substantive law gives us, that is adjective or procedural law. So guys, Code of Civil Procedure. The word procedure is there. So you guys would know now that procedure means adjective or procedural law. It is providing us with a machinery to enforce whatever rights or liabilities are arising under substantive law. Okay. One more thing, before the application of CPC, what should be there, that a substantive law which is giving a right, it should be infringed. That's why no, ubi jus ibi remedium. So one more thing, ubi jus ibi remedium. What does it mean? Where there is right, there is law. Where there is right, there is remedy. Ubi jus ibi remedium. Where there is a right, there is a remedy. It means that without remedy, what's the point of giving you a right? If I gave A a right, if his right gets infringed, then what's the remedy? What he can do if his right get infringed? So this remedium means remedy. For example, we have fundamental rights. Will this fundamental right, could you claim if this 32 article wouldn't have been there? Could you anywhere claim this right? See, from my words, another thing came. Right and claim. What is right and what's a claim? What's the difference? Fundamental right is a right or a claim? Or when does a right becomes a claim? These are my questions to you. So, I would like to tell you that a right, when stricto sensu, a right when given in stricto sensu, it becomes a claim. Fundamental right given to us has been given in stricto sensu. What shows that this right has been given in stricto sensu? That there is a remedy in Article 32. If this right is infringed, if any of the fundamental right is infringed, you could seek writ jurisdiction of the Supreme Court under Article 32. This is the remedy provided to you. So remedium is there. Ubi jus ibi remedium. Okay. This was a simple jurisprudence about right and claim. Ubi jus ibi remedium. So what we were discussing is that whenever a right gets infringed, if a right one person has obtained from a private agreement, then it will be a civil right. If his civil right is infringed, where he would like to go? CPC. Because it's a machinery which will enforce his right now. Okay? So, CPC, it's a procedural law or adjective law. Procedural or adjective law? What's the object of this CPC or this procedure? To facilitate the administration of justice, to enforce his right and to punish that person, to impose penalty on that person who has infringed his right. So how he will get his right enforced, or how one person will be imposed penalty, is discussed under CPC. What all procedure to facilitate the administration of justice has to follow is given under CPC. Okay, this is I think very simple beginning of CPC. So, Code of Civil Procedure, before 1859, I must tell you, there were numerous kinds of civil procedure being followed in Bengal and other presidential towns. So during 1859, first civil procedure came in India. First civil procedure came. and I would also tell you the committee from where it came. The CPC was firstly enacted in 1859 by the committee headed by Mr. John Romilly. Mr. John Romilly headed the committee in 1859. The first CPC, or you can say, yeah, CPC, civil procedure, 1859. But it was not that good. Ill will was there, too many problems were there. So it got amended in 1877. It got amended in 1877. Subsequently, it again got amended in 1882. No, it didn't get amended. This was a fresh one. This was a fresh one. Fresh law. And this got supplanted by 1908. The one which we are studying now. Too many sections were there. More than 600 sections were there in 1882. These sections were modified and orders and rules came instead of those sections. So this 1882 lastly got supplanted by 1908 amendment. So what final we have? 1908. CPC 1908. 1908. Okay. So the present CPC in 1908 was drafted by the committee headed by Sir Earl Richards. Earl Richards. E-A-R-L Richards. हमारा ये एक्ट भी अधूरा नहीं था 1908 में जो बना था. इसमें भी प्रॉब्लम थी, इसमें भी अमेंडमेंट आए थे. Amendments came in 1908 one also. I hope you would have paused the video and noted all this down. I used to do like that when I used to watch a video. What I told you guys is that first CPC came in 1859, then 1877, then after 5 years 1882, this was a fresh one, then 1908, supplanted, okay, 1908, it got amended in 1976, later 1999, which was again few provisions were not immediately enforced, so this also known as it also came in 2002. Yeah, it came in 2002. This is the little bit history about CPC. Next, what I'm going to tell you is that simple MCQ type questions which come under judicial examinations. First of all, you should know these amendments 1976, 1990, 2002. One more thing, that this amendment got valid in Salem Bar Association. Salem Bar Association and others versus Union of India and others held the amendments 1999 and 2002 valid with effect from 1st July 2002. This question is very important for MCQ purpose. these two, 1999 and 2002. This is for MCQ question. Held valid. Held valid in which case? Salem Bar Association and others versus Union of India and others. Very important case. And these two came into force on 1st of July 2002. Again, next MCQ question. This CPC came into force when? Look at your Bare Act. Look at your Bare Act. Section 1 says short title, commencement and extent. This act may be cited as the Code of Civil Procedure 1908. It shall come into force on the first day of January 1909. When did it came into force? 1st January 1909. Okay. In this section only it is written when where all it is applicable. It is applicable to whole of India except tribal areas. Whatever it is given, you have to read that. Okay. Now comes section 2. This all will discuss concept wise. When we'll study decree, we'll discuss decree, order and judgment. Everything we'll discuss. Now I would like to tell you few basic concepts about CPC. For example, cause of action, parties, proper party, necessary party. All this we should know before going deep into CPC. One more thing I would like to tell you is that the body of CPC. The body of CPC is like how many sections are there? How many? Are there any parts? Any schedule? How many orders are there? All these things. So CPC is in two parts, right? CPC is in two parts. First part, what's the first part? See, when you see the index, you'll get to know how many sections are there, orders and everything. Okay, and please note one point. The orders are in Romans. First, second, third, fourth. This is very important. For mains answer writing also, whenever you have to write orders, don't write this order 5. No. Order 5. Okay? Order 5. O full. O-R-D-E-R. Full. Not O. So the body of the code is what? Sections 1 to 151. 158. Okay. Second, orders from order 1 to order 51. See, this is 51. And inside this order, rules are there. Under various orders, various number of rules are there. Okay. So this is the body. This is section 1 to 158, order 1 to order 51. Okay. So this being a procedural, okay, one more MCQ type question is there. Is CPC an exhaustive code? Today I'll tell you from where we get to know whether a code or any statute is exhaustive or not. So let's come on the object of this code. What's the object of this law, of this civil procedure code? The object is written. The object, or you can also say it preamble. an act to consolidate and amend the laws relating to the procedure of the courts of civil judicature. I'll repeat it again. An act to consolidate and amend the law relating to the procedure of the courts of civil judicature. See, the word consolidate is there. Consolidate means to make everything come at one place, at one point. So, consolidate itself shows us that this is exhaustive. That everything is there in this thing. So, this is exhaustive. I like you to note down one case law. Iridium Indian Telecom. Iridium Indian Telecom versus Motorola Incorporation. Motorola Incorporation, 2005. In this case, it was said that CPC is exhaustive. It is a complete code in itself as regards the subject it deals with. It would govern all actions of a civil nature unless otherwise provided for, and thus its provisions are to be construed as exhaustive with regard to the matters dealt within it. So, CPC is an exhaustive. The word consolidate itself shows that this code is exhaustive. So, as I earlier said that the function of procedural law is to facilitate justice and further its end, and therefore the rule of procedure must be construed liberally. For example, see, the sections not mostly, but few are substantive in nature. If the procedural part, the orders, the rules get in conflict with the substantive will prevail. The substantive will prevail. So both the sections and the orders and the rules within it have to be harmoniously interpreted. This is one rule of interpretation which I gave about CPC. Orders and section both have to be harmoniously interpreted. Okay? And therefore the rules of procedure must be construed liberally and in such manner so as to render the enforcement of substantive rights effective. Why this harmonious interpretation is done? So that the substantive right get enforced. The liability get imposed. There is one section under this CPC. If nothing is provided in that CPC, then also something can be done. That section is, comment me when you see that video. It says that code recognizes the inherent powers of the court. This code CPC recognizes the inherent powers of the court and specifically provides that nothing is to limit or otherwise affect the inherent powers of the court to make such orders as may be necessary for the ends of justice or to prevent abuse of the process of the court. When the court is silent regarding a procedural aspect, under this provision of inherent power, anything can be done to render justice. My friends, this was an introduction for CPC. I told you this is a procedural law. All the historical background I've told you, the committees, the first CPC, the Indian case of exhaustiveness, 1st January 1909 was the enforcement date, commencement date, and sections, applicability. Okay, so now let's start with essentials of suit. Essentials of suit. What one needs in a suit? Tell me. What one needs in a suit? So what is suit? First of all, blazer. What is a suit? What activity it is showing? Suit is an action. Suit is an action. When someone says I sue you, I will take action against you through court. I will put a case against you in the court. Then their lordship will tell you whether I have this right or not. I have a right. One person infringed my right. When both these will join, you will go to the court and pray, sir, your lordship, this guy has committed this and this breach of my this and this existing right. Therefore, I pray, I come here in front of you and please give me such and such relief. Because the law, the substantive law, which was providing me the right, it has also provided me the remedy. So if you provide me this remedy, I'll be highly obliged to your relief. You should point out two things here. I'm using two words simultaneously. Remedy and belief. What's the difference between remedy and belief? Remedy and belief. So, just after 5 or 6 minutes, I'll tell you what's the difference between remedy and belief. First of all, we should get to know what is a suit. Why you go there? What is cause of action? What is parties? Proper party, necessary party, all these things. Subject matter, everything. So first of all, let us discuss about parties. So as for essential of suit, there should be two people. One having a right and other breaching that right. So the party. You need a party. Party A. Essentials of suit. See, A has what A has? A has a right. B infringed. A and B agreed that A will sell his house to B in the consideration of ₹1,000. If B will give A ₹1,000, A will sell him his house. So this is agreed, enforceable by law, contract. B gave him his ₹1,000. He is not selling his house. B had the right to have the house in consideration of ₹1,000. So A gave him his house. That was also correct, but I have written right and infringed here, that's why I'm again repeating it. Just exchanging. A sells his house, gives his house. Conveyance is already done on paper. A has shifted. B has occupied the position. B has got the position. He is in the house now. But A haven't got the 1000 rupees. Now what? A has the right to get 1000 rupees. B is not giving. A has the right to get rupees 1000. B is not giving. B infringed. Now A will take an action. What this action will be? What will be the face of this action? The face of suit. Suit. S-U-I-T. Suit. So, for a suit, what we need first of all? Essential of a suit. Party. A and B. First is party. One party or more than one party. More than means like in party. So one is known as plaintiff and the defendant. Plaintiff and defendant. So under order 1, what you will get is about parties only. Plaintiff, defendant, joinder of plaintiff, misjoinder of defendant, misjoinder of parties, necessary party, proper party. So we will discuss this in detail now about parties. So essentials of suit is party. I think I'm not getting too fast. I'm keeping it very simple. Party. So, party. A party, B party. When A's right got infringed, there arose cause of action. Against whom? Against B. Until and unless a cause of action arises against any party, this guy cannot become a party to a suit. Means this A alternatively cannot act against him. There should be some cause of action arising against one party. Okay? So, A and B here are parties. Now this code CPC provides for and necessary party. Now this is very important to concentrate on, because MCQ type question will come on this. Like, does a suit fails on joinder, misjoinder of necessary party, proper party? What's the difference between proper party and necessary party? This all we should learn from here. This is simple order 1 things. So proper party is one who is not a necessary party. If is not made a party, the suit will not fail. But it would be better if one person who is a proper party should be included in the suit, because this will only facilitate the administration of justice in a wholesome manner. Means adjudication, determination on determining of rights will be done in a judicial manner if this proper party is made a party. If any person is a proper party, he should be made a party. Okay? But the suit will not fail if this person is not made a party. And what's a necessary party? Necessary party is a party against whom a decree will be enforced, or in favor of whom a decree will be given. Judgment debtor, decree holder. These two are the necessary parties. In my next videos I'll tell you about judgment debtor and decree holder. Just think that against whom a decree will be passed, in favor of whom a decree will be passed, without whom a decree which cannot be executed. Those people are the necessary parties, the main people. A proper party is a party who, though not a necessary party, is a person whose presence would enable the court to completely, effectively and adequately adjudicate upon all matters in disputes in the suit. Though he may not be a person in favor of or against whom the decree is to be made. Okay? He may not be a person against whom or in favor of whom a decree is to be made. But a necessary party is certainly a person against whom or in favor of whom a decree is to be made. Therefore, the suit fails. If any party who is a necessary party is not impleaded in the suit. Again, I use the word impleaded. I'll tell you afterwards what do you mean by impleaded. Now, necessary party. I'll tell you again about definition of proper party. A proper party is a party who, though not necessary party, is a person whose presence would enable the court to completely, effectively and adjudicately and adequately adjudicate upon all matters in dispute in the suit, though he may not be a person in favor of or against whom the decree is to be made. Okay? Now, necessary party. Who is a necessary party? A necessary party is one without whom no order can be effectively, and a proper party is one in whose absence an effective order can be made, but whose presence is necessary for a complete and final decision of the question involved in the proceedings. Means a necessary party is a person without whom an effective order cannot be made. So, the distinction between necessary and proper party is that necessary party presence is essential because in his absence no effective decree or order can be passed or made. Okay? In his absence no effective decree or order can be passed or made. A proper party is one without whom a decree or order can be passed or made, but whose presence is necessary for an effectual. इनके बिना भी डिक्री ऑर्डर दी जा सकती है, but his presence is deemed to be necessary from the perspective of complete justice. See, all this we were discussing order 1. Like order 1 rule 1 talks about plaintiff, joinder of plaintiffs. Order 1 rule 3 talks about defendants, joinder of defendants. Similarly, order 1 rule 9 talks about joinder, misjoinder. I'll tell you afterwards what is joinder and misjoinder. Now order 1 rule 10. Rule 10 sub rule 2. What it talks about? It provides for impleadment of proper. Note down, mark the word impleadment of proper or necessary parties. If necessary party is not impleaded, the suit itself would be liable to be dismissed. If necessary party is not impleaded, the suit itself would be liable to be dismissed. If a person is not found to be necessary or proper party, the court has no jurisdiction to implead him. Why will the court require a person who is not a proper necessary? Why will he implead him? Means making him a party. Impleadment means making him a party in the suit. Okay, I think this was enough on proper party, necessary party. Next is joinder and misjoinder. See, joinder and misjoinder, I won't go in very detail. I'll just tell you joinder and misjoinder. Joinder and misjoinder. This is non-joinder. Non-joinder and misjoinder. Non-joinder, where in a suit the plaintiff fails to join a person. Where in a suit the plaintiff fails to join a person who is either a necessary party or a proper party to the suit, it is a case of non-joinder of parties. When a plaintiff fails to join a person who is either a necessary party or a proper party to the suit, it is a case of non-joinder of parties. Okay? Non-joinder means plaintiff is not joining someone in the party. When he is coming up with the case, when he is coming up with his plaint, I'll tell what plaint is. When the person is coming, filing a suit in the court, where he is filing against someone else, someone or the other, if he is not making one very essential person who is a proper party or necessary party, then this is non-joinder. Non-joinder, not joining, not non-joinder, not joining a necessary or proper party. What is misjoinder? Where persons are joined as plaintiff or defendant, and where there was no need, because they were neither a necessary party nor a proper party. Here, this is misjoinder, a mistake of joining the people who were neither a necessary party nor a proper party. This was a mistake, misjoinder. There was a joining, but it was a mistake. They were not a proper party or necessary party to get joined. So what does order 1 rule 9 says? No suit shall be defeated by reason of the misjoinder or non-joinder of parties. Okay, and the court may in every suit deal with the matter in controversy so far as regards the rights and interests of the parties actually before it. There is a proviso which will talk about necessary party, provided that nothing in this rule shall apply to non-joinder of necessary party. It means the suit will fail if there is a non-joinder of necessary party. This is an 1 or 2 mark MCQ question. Whether the suit gets failed, 4 options will be there. Misjoinder of necessary party, non-joinder, misjoinder of necessary party. That's a joke. Misjoinder. If a person is joined and is a necessary party, then why will it be a misjoinder? It will be good only, no? Where the person is not joined and he is a necessary party, this is a mistake, huge mistake. The suit will fail here, because a decree cannot be made against that person or in favor of that person who is a necessary party. So what's the point of this adjudication? What's the point of this determining the rights? This was all about non-joinder and misjoinder as of for now. Okay? This was about parties. Along with this, there is one more provision, section 99 of CPC. What it says? Let's read. No decree to be reversed or modified for error or irregularity not affecting merits or jurisdiction. What does section 99 says? No decree to be reversed or modified for error or irregularity not affecting merits or jurisdiction. At this point of time, I want to tell you guys one more thing. How to read a provision, any provision of any book, and of any statute, any law. How to read it? Read it very slowly. Be very concentrated while reading. Commas, your mind should be very sharp on commas, full stops, other things. So what does 99 says? Very slowly, read it very slowly. No decree to be reversed or modified. See, if this will come in MCQ, what it will say? It will be on 2 points only, reversed or modified. A third option will be the altered. People will mark altered also. So this is the point. If you will read like this, no, you will get it memorized slowly. The more you see it, the more you grasp it. No decree to be reversed or modified for error or irregularity not affecting merits or jurisdiction. If there is any error or irregularity which is not affecting the merits, means which is not affecting the evidences adduced by the parties, which is not affecting the observations which the court has taken, then it will not affect the merit of the case. Okay? When something is not of such a nature which would change the jurisdiction of the court, so no effect is there on the case. So this will not reverse or modify the decree. Okay. So let's read it again. The inside provision. No decree shall be reversed or substantially varied, nor shall any case be remanded in appeal on account of any misjoinder or non-joinder of parties or causes of action or any error, defect or irregularity in any proceedings in the suit not affecting the merits of the case or the jurisdiction of the case. If any error or irregularity is not affecting the merits of the case or the jurisdiction of the court, then a decree will not get modified or reversed. Provided that nothing in this section, there is a proviso, provided that nothing in this section shall apply to non-joinder of a necessary party. Non-joinder, if it is there of a necessary party, means if a necessary party is not made a party in the suit, then the case will get dismissed, then the suit will get dismissed. Means what is the effect of section 99? That the decree will be reversed or modified because this error or irregularity, what's the error or irregularity? The error or irregularity is of non-joinder of a necessary party. This non-joinder of necessary party will affect the merit or it will affect the jurisdiction. For example, a necessary party's right gets breached somewhere else, cause of action arose there. What kind of damages he suffered, of what value? All these things gets included. So this will affect the jurisdiction as well as the merit of the case. So here the decree will get reversed. So along with this, all in party, along with order 1, we should also read section 99. This was all about parties. Now we'll come to cause of action. Means, like I told you earlier, right, breach, go to court, prayer, ask for relief. Okay? Cause of action is the next essential of a suit. This will be a very basic class on law, CPC, everything. This is very basic class. So whatever I'll teach today, you have to read it again. You have to go through the provisions. I have made you teach today order 1. I taught you today order 1, rule 1, rule 3, rule 9, rule 10, sub rule 2, rule 10, rule 8. You have to know all these rules. At least read it twice, slowly, the way I read section 99. And yes, section 99 also you have to read. So next essential is second one, cause of action. Cause of action. Cause of suit. Why a person is coming with a suit? Person is coming with a suit because he had some right, his right got infringed. Okay? Cause of action. So, action. So, action means suit. Cause of suit literally means the reason why he is coming with a suit. Why is filing a suit? Why is coming with a plaint? So, action means suit, while the cause of action is literally the cause or the set of circumstances which leads up to a suit. A cause of action arises when a legal right is infringed, as I told you. See, this cause of action phrase has been used many times. Okay. And I don't think this cause of action has been defined in this code anywhere. Judicial precedents interpretations are there on this. So to simply say the expression cause of action means the bundle of facts which give rise to a right or a liability. What facts give rise to a right or a liability? Okay. So I am reading one thing. The very classic definition of cause of action. Cause of action is found in the instant case. Which case? Cook versus Gill. Cook versus Gill. I won't be going too deep today in cause of action because this is for further. Further I'll teach you. Cook versus Gill, a definition of cause of action has been provided. Lord Brett says, Lord Brett, B-R-E-T-T, Lord Brett, observed, cause of action means every fact which it would be necessary for the plaintiff to prove. In order to support his right to the judgment of the court. Cause of action means that a plaintiff has to only prove, no, the burden of proof is on the plaintiff that there existed a right and that some person has infringed that right. So all the facts which a plaintiff has to prove in order to support his right to judgment of the court. Means in order to make the court believe that there existed a right, his right got believed. So please give him some relief. So Lord Brett observed that cause of action means every fact which it would be necessary for the plaintiff to prove in order to support his right to the judgment of the court. Okay. So in Cook versus Gill, this definition was given. If you write this in your mains examination, it will be very good. And Cook versus Gill can also come for MCQ also. Like in MCQ, many match the following questions come. Cause of action will be there. Then Cook versus Gill will be there. Many other questions will be there. Other things. Which one of the following is correctly matched? This type of question will come. This is correctly matched. Cause of action, Cook versus Gill. A classic definition. So, cause of action, two things we need. What? Right. Existence of right. Existence of right. Second, breach of right. Breach of this right. They both has to happen. Have to happen. So, whenever a person comes with a plaint, what is a plaint now? Plaint is a pleading. Like I'll go to the court. If I agreed with someone or something, he has to give me something, I had to give him something. I gave him that thing, he didn't give me what he promised. So I was entitled to that which he promised, he didn't give me. Now I am going to the court. That I was entitled to this for having this was my right. He infringed that right. I'll write it in a plaint. Okay, I'll write it in a plaint. I'll tell the court, say this is thing. Okay. So what I told, existence of it. How it existed? Because we agreed. And there was an intention of a contract also. So breach, and he breached. Breach of this contract is this, both I have to prove. Whoever is coming with the plaint. Okay. So individually, all the facts, each and every fact is called an averment. 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 Okay, tell me now. What if I do not disclose these facts in the plaint? What will happen? In the plaint, if I do not tell about the cause of action, what will happen? The court will reject the plaint. This is Order 7, Rule 11. Okay? The court will reject the plaint. This is the very first condition of rejecting of plaint, if there is no cause of action. Let's read it. Order 7, Rule 11. Rejection of a plaint. Order 7, Rule 11. The plaint shall be rejected in the following cases: where it does not disclose a cause of action. Where it does not disclose a cause of action, the plaint will get rejected. Okay? So now tell me, there was a breach of a contract. What a person will write in his plaint in terms of cause of action? What he will write? He will write that the defendant entered into a contract, into the alleged contract with him, and that the defendant committed a breach of this contract. Okay? he entered into a contract, this shows the existence of right. He breached the contract, this means there was a breach of this right. Okay, these two things simultaneously go, then there arises a cause of action. Cause of action, to put it very simple, means why a person is coming to the court to file a suit against someone. Simple, cause of action. I'll read 4 or 5 lines, just listen to it very carefully. Cause of action consists of 2 elements: existence of a legal right in the plaintiff and violation of that right by the defendant. Okay? Cause of action in the plaint shall have the statement to the effect of the existence of the right in the plaintiff and violation of such right. And accordingly, the burden of proof will be to the extent of proving both these facts unless either of these has been admitted by the defendant. If either of these will be admitted by the defendant, then there is no need of proving. Simple. Cause of action is the pivot. P-I-V-O-T. Cause of action is the pivot. P-I-V-O-T. Pivot around which the entire suit revolves. Cause of action should be disclosed properly so that the court can frame issues. This is later part. Because with the help of cause of action only, see whether there was existence of any right, whether the agreement was enforceable by law, whether the consideration was lawful, whether the object of the contract was lawful. If the contract was void, then how come there will be an existence of right? So these are the issues which gets framed when a cause of action is there. Until this, a cause of action will be expressly given, expressly provided and in the plaint, how will the court frame the issues? That's what I was trying to say. One more thing. Okay, cause of action is finished now. This much only. Averments, I told you, that individual facts, each and every fact is a particular averment. The whole thing, the whole document is a plaint. Where you writing everything, that is a plaint. And individual facts which shows the cause of action is the averment. Okay. And in the parties, I forgot to tell you about one party. This is called not party defendant, pro forma defendant. Pro forma defendant. So what is pro forma defendant? This is a house. It belongs to A and B. Okay. C is unlawfully taking the possession of this house. C. So what happens here is A is going against C to file a suit. Cause of action is unlawfully occupying his house. Means he is showing his title deed that is not correct what A and B are trying to show, but only A is going against C to file a suit. B is not going. B is saying I don't have time. This house doesn't value that much to me that I should daily go to the court and beat around the bush, because civil cases they take too much of time until unless you have hired a good advocate. So what will happen here is B is a proper party necessary or the necessary party. B is a proper party or necessary party here, because the decree will be, if made will be in favor of them or against them. I think B is here the necessary party. Yes. So what will happen is there is a conflict of interest between A, B and C. What will happen here is A will file a suit against C and will also make B a defendant. This is a pro forma defendant. B when made defendant by the plaintiff. B when made defendant by the plaintiff. Okay. Is a pro forma defendant. Here both their interest is in conflict with C, but B is not coming and B has to be made a party. B doesn't want to file a suit. What A will do is A will file a suit against C and will also make B a defendant. Now B will be called a pro forma defendant. So pro forma defendant is a party who has been made a defendant in the suit and who actually has a jointness or commonality of interest with the plaintiff. He ought to have joined the suit as a plaintiff. B ought to have joined the suit with A as a plaintiff, but he didn't do so. So therefore the A has made B a defendant only for the sake of formality, just in order to make B a party in the suit. Such party being a necessary party. See, B is a necessary party. That's why A has to make B party. If he is not willing to be a plaintiff with A, then A is making B a defendant. So, see, if B will not be a party in this case, no, the suit will fail. C will be at advantage. C will gain advantage of this. So A has to make B a defendant, so that the suit commences and a decree is made in favor of him or against C. Such party being a necessary party, this party, B, being a necessary party, not joining would render the decision of the suit difficult or the execution of decree may be hindered, and therefore he is joined as a pro forma defendant. The court can transpose B later as a plaintiff. Okay. So, two things. Impleadment means to join a person in a suit, and striking out means to remove a person from the position of a party to the suit. Okay. I think for essential of suit, cause of action and parties. I told you these two things. Few more are there, not few more, two things. Subject matter. Okay, I'll tell you subject matter. So there's nothing in subject matter. Subject matter is on what thing they two parties are fighting. On what? In this case, a house. This house is the subject matter. Okay, this subject matter decides the jurisdiction of the court. This subject matter only decides the jurisdiction of the court. This house is the subject matter. Okay, so this is enough for subject matter. Relief and remedy, I told you in the beginning that I will tell you relief and remedy. For example, in Contract Act, if a contract is breached, what remedy that this Contract Act is providing under Section 73? Damages, Specific Relief Act, injunctions, specific relief. Okay, all these, what are all these? These are remedies. When you go to the court and you get one of these remedies, that is relief. You get relieved by the court. This is relief. When the same remedy a court is providing, that is called a relief. And when a substantive law is giving you one right and is also giving you a remedy, also giving you how to enforce that right, that's a remedy. When the court is executing that remedy, that becomes a relief. Okay? So one more thing, very basic thing, that see, sections are there, orders are there. We have seen that who can amend the orders, who can amend the sections. So in CPC, sections and orders. Sections can be amended with the help of legislature only. So the rules within the order and the rules within the orders can be amended by the respective high courts and the state legislature. Okay, and sections only by the legislature and order by the high court. This was the thing. So order, high court can amend orders. Okay, in this section who can amend? Legislature.